Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series in economics. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be taking a look at the difference between change in quantity demanded and change in demand. And the reason why this video is important, as always, is that this is something that students oftentimes get confused. They think that these two terms or phrases are identical to one another, and they are not identical to one another. It's a common problem that students have, so I thought making this video would be of some help. As always, I try to give appropriate attribution for any of the content that I use, so anything that you see in quotes is from the textbook that is underlined here on this particular slide. So a shift of the demand curve. The change that takes place in a demand curve corresponding to a new relationship between quantity demanded of a good and the price of a good. So what that means is, if you visualize that the demand schedule I previously went over in a video, we initially start with price quantity combinations of a demand curve, and what happens is that some external change occurs so that either at specific prices the quantity demanded increases or the quantity demanded decreases. So the way that's graphically represented is a shifting of the demand curve. The demand curve physically changes its location, as opposed to a movement along the demand curve, which is the change in quantity demanded brought about by a change in the price. In particular, a change in the price of the product that we're talking about. So, for example, if we were to have a demand curve for Coca-Cola, if we were to change the price of Coca-Cola, that would entail us moving from one part of the demand curve to another part of the demand curve. So a movement along the demand curve, for example, if I change the price of Coca-Cola, the demand curve doesn't shift. It's the same demand curve. We're still on the same demand curve. We're just physically moving to another location on that pre-existing demand curve. So let me actually give you a couple of visual examples here so you can better visualize what I'm talking about. So if I'm talking about a change in the quantity demanded, so we have our demand curve. Let's say this is the demand for Coca-Cola. And let's say a 12-pack of Coca-Cola is equal to $6. The price of it's $6. At that particular price, the quantity demanded is equal to 30. So when the price of a 12-pack, of Coca-Cola is equal to $6, people willingly will purchase 30 of those 12 packs. And I'm representing that by point A. Let's say that the price of that 12-pack decreases to $3. We follow that over to the demand curve and down, and that gives us the new quantity demanded of 60. So all we've done by lowering the price of Coca-Cola is that from $6 to $3, we've moved from point A to point B. So make sure you remember that changing the price of a good changes its quantity demanded. You're just moving from one point on a demand curve to another point on the same demand curve. Now this is different than change in demand. Change in demand means that the demand curve is physically going to change its location. So here I have a demand curve D0, and what's going to occur? There's going to be some external change. Not the price of this particular product, but some other external change that physically causes the demand curve to change its location. So for example, the demand curve could shift to the right, and we have a new demand curve D1, and that is a new demand curve that represents this external change. So for example, a change in income, a change in wealth, the change in the price of related goods, whether it's substitutes or complementary goods. If people's tastes and preferences are changing, or there's changes in people's expectations about pricing, that causes the demand curve to physically shift its location. So this represents an increase in demand, and a shift to the left represents a decrease in demand. So changing the other determinants of demand shifts the demand curve. And by shift, I mean it's going to have a new location, either to the right or to the left. So make sure you're comfortable with this. Is a very common mistake students make when they hear the terms change in demand versus change in the quantity demanded. As it shows here, change in demand is the demand curve physically shifting its location right or left, and that's due to the other determinants of demand that we talked about. Income, the price of related goods, changing tastes and preferences, or people's expectations changing. If I'm talking about the change in quantity demanded of a good, I am changing the price of that good and moving to a different location on a pre-existing demand curve. So there's no shifting of the demand curve when you're asked about change in quantity demanded.